And today, before I introduce the topic, let me introduce our panelist for the day. We have Dr. Marma Maziad of the Defense and Security Program at the Middle East Institute in Washington, joining us from Cairo. From Washington, D.C., Annelle Sheline, PhD Research Fellow at the Middle East Program, again in D.C. And here in the Tel Aviv studios, Gilad Katz, former Consul General of Israel to the Southwest. Hello all, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. And today our main topic is the ever-shifting pendulum of the Middle East, the change of interest, nations getting closer together, mutual enemies, a whole lot to unpack. But our main question for today, can geopolitics triumph ideological differences? Let's take a closer look and pick up the debate right after.
The tides may be changing in the Middle East, as the United States administration is said to be secretly negotiating a deal between Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Egypt. Citing 5 US and Israeli sources, the report says the United States took a leading role in solving the issue of transferring 2 strategic islands in the Red Sea, Tiran and Sanafir, from Egypt to Saudi Arabia. No agreement has been signed yet. However, the transfer could be a step in the direction of potential normalization between the Saudi kingdom and the Jewish state. The White House intends to reach an agreement before Biden visits the Middle East at the end of June. And ties between Turkey and Israel also seem to be strengthening, as the foreign minister is in Israel for a 2-day trip, the first by a Turkish foreign minister in 15 years. The possibility of bringing back ambassadors in both countries, as well as a potential Israeli-Turkish pipeline to export gas to Europe, is reportedly on the agenda. So, with several deals on the horizon, is a middle ground for the Middle East around the corner? Could the potential Saudi-Israel island trade be the foundation for warmer diplomatic ties in the region? Can geopolitics in the Middle East triumph over ideology?
So can the Middle East ever meet in the middle? Let's get to it. Can geopolitical interests triumph ideological differences? Dear ladies and gentlemen, you know the rules. You each get 30 seconds to lay your initial stance, and we'll pick up the debate right after. So Dr. Maziad, please take the lead.
Well, I think the short answer to this is yes. Ideological positions are often even assumed in order to achieve certain geopolitical interests and certain economic or political influence and clout. So I would say that the region experienced a series of ideological changes, perhaps since the inception of the modern state in Israel and also the independent republic in Egypt. We're talking 1948, 1952, all the 50s. They alternated between even socialism at some point to more market economy and privatization to a conservative turn into Islamism.
Dr. Maziad, let's put a stop right here and continue the debate in a split second. But Annelle, your take on the matter?
Well, I would certainly agree with Dr. Maziad's point that in the past we have seen ideology generally taking a backseat to geopolitical considerations. And so I think in the current context, it's much more important to look at the power balances in the region. For example, Saudi Arabia, having seen the extent to which the UAE has benefited from the Abraham Accords, knowing that the Saudis are eager to establish themselves and perhaps usurp the UAE's position as a major investment and transport hub in the Gulf.
Right. Experience tops estimations in this respect. Last but not least, Gilad.
Thank you. I think that we should rephrase the question, because I don't think if we ask the question as ideology on the one hand and the politics on the other hand, it will take us to a clash. What we have to talk about is, first of all, lower the expectations. That is very, very important in politics, and find mutual grounds. We know, according to what just mentioned, Abraham Accords, if we find mutual grounds, then I think the politics and ideology will somehow work together.
Well, before we talk about mutual ground, let's talk the different interest of each party in this respect. And from this point onwards, please feel free to interact, dear panelists. They say that the road to Washington goes through Jerusalem. So my question to you is, what is it that the Saudis want, either from Israel or from Washington? Doctor, please take the lead.
So I would think that, actually the road to Washington goes through Washington. I think each of these countries that you mentioned, Saudi Arabia is a major U.S. partner on its own for its own interest. The United States has interest in Saudi Arabia. Apart from the issue of Israel, it's independent of that. So I would say that each country has a bilateral relation that brings them together for the first time, perhaps, to start looking at one another. Egypt has a strong relation with the U.S., Israel does, and so does Saudi Arabia. For the past few years, they've been really thinking, why can't we get together and form these relations one-on-one as a region? And I think that's the change in direction over the past few years, because all these parties started thinking that they can form ties, maybe perhaps a little bit even more independent of the United States. So that's the change here.
But Annelle, the American kosher stamp, so to speak, can definitely be helpful for Riyadh as it wants to pave its way back to the international arena full speed, no?
Well, I think that, if we're addressing... If we're addressing some issues between the United States and Saudi Arabia over the past few years, I think the Saudis bypassed and outlasted any estimates by some analysts that this relationship between the two countries would be really affected. They mentioned the Khashoggi case, which by now is framed as if Khashoggi was just a Turkey operative, and once these two countries mended ties, Turkey and Saudi Arabia, that is, this even file was closed. So I would say that the Saudi Arabia has managed its relation with the United States one-on-one, and also with each respective party in the region quite well, so much so that now we're talking relations between Saudi and Israel, and even Saudi and Turkey. I think the regional dynamics actually trump the United States relation to each respective country.
Annelle, your opinion on that?
Well, I think that Saudi Arabia has reasons to normalize with Israel regardless. As I was saying, they've seen the way the UAE has benefited. But I think that they're hoping to get benefits from the United States as well. So we've heard these rumors of the possibility of the formalization of a security commitment by the United States to the Saudis, as well as possibly the Egyptians, the Emiratis, maybe also Israel, which I think, given the way that geopolitics is going, the United States in the past has clearly signaled that it's very important for U.S. interests to shift out of the Middle East, to look more closely at China, to focus more on Russia, obviously, that the importance of oil is just not quite what it used to be and will continue to decline. And so in general, I don't think that it's actually a great idea for the United States to bend over backwards to give the Saudis what it is that they're wanting, such as a formal security commitment, when the Saudis, especially once Mohammed bin Salman assumes the throne, they may choose to normalize with Israel anyway.
And I would like to capitalize on that point exactly. Gilad, we say follow the money. In this respect, follow the oil more accurately. Also very timely when we're seeing the Russia-Ukraine war underway. The U.S. needs some leverage when it comes to Saudi oil. It is essential for Biden for domestic reasons, trying to lower oil rates ahead of midterms, right? So it's not purely diplomacy here, also political considerations.
I would add even something else. I would add Iran as a central player that all the countries here in the Middle East, and when I say all countries, I'm focusing mainly on Israel, and I'm focusing on Egypt, and of course Saudi Arabia. Iran is the country that threatens the stability in the region. And I would like to take you back to 2015. I think that is when Saudi Arabia understood that Israel is an asset. And that is when they started to come more closer and closer to Israel behind the scenes, because they understood that Israel is the only country that can stand firm against Iran. And now, if we come back to 2022, we know that there is tension between Saudi Arabia and the United States regarding maybe we don't know when they'll sign the agreement, the new agreement, and I think all three players, meaning Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, know that their shared interest is to work together behind the scenes, maybe sometimes even, on camera. But it is important first and foremost for their security. That's why it's even more important than economy, it's more important than politics, and it's more important than diplomacy. I think most important is security, and once we say security, we understand, and all the three players understand that these three players are on the same side, or are on the good side of history, and that is why the relationships will tighten and strengthen throughout the coming years.
But, we're already 10 minutes into the debate, more or less, and we have not mentioned the Palestinian issue. The Saudis are reiterating time and again that without any advancement when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, normalization in full scale could not be achieved. And, seeing the recent tensions in Jerusalem and the killing of the Palestinian journalist, Shireen Abu Akleh, definitely not helping. Can the Saudis really ditch, quote unquote, the Palestinian cause for the sake of normalization with Israel? Or in other words, how can they, quote unquote, sell it to the Arab population if they do, Dr. Majid?
Well, let's be clear about one thing. Saudi Arabia is in no rush or eagerness really to formalize any ties with Israel in any visible way. It already has security relations with Israel. They are managing issues. And back to the point about Iran, by the way, it's one thing, of course, that they all converge on the meaning that Iran is a threat with its proxies, with the missiles it has, besides the nuclear issue, actually. But also, just to play devil's advocate here, being too close to Israel sometimes can be a liability in respect to Iran, because Iran can start hitting targets within Saudi Arabia, and we saw that with UAE just by virtue of that very proximity to Israel. So in fact, these Gulf countries are also establishing some connections with Iran, talking to Iran, getting to some diplomatic ties in a way. So I think it's a dance. So just that's about Iran. The other thing about the Palestinians, I would say also that the Saudis will remain the ones that speak on behalf of the Palestinian rights and issues and grievances, in order also to perhaps market themselves that they are the ones that are always bringing back the 2002 initiative that was talking about the borders being within 1967, etc. So now that they see that Emiratis are doing their own thing, Egypt, of course, was before all of these people had its own peace treaty with Israel, and it had its own ongoing relation. So maybe marketing itself as the one that still speaks on behalf of the Palestinians, in order also to combat the position of Iran that argues that
many competitors over those who will raise the flag of the Palestinian issue here in the region. We're taking a very short break, but we continue the debate right after. Don't go anywhere. Back in a tiny bit.